get its old ways back. Its way of life now seems to be the only way. The man or Abe, whichever one you want to see it as, is pleading for Japan or the villager to see a new way. Go back one. On page 150, it says later, he's talking to himself, had the old man heard or not, he turned his head blankly to make a movement as if he were shaking off a playful kitten. Was he perhaps nervous about the lookout in the fire tower? Would it be bad if they were to be seen talking with each other? He wondered. The fire tower seems to be kind of like an authority over the villager, and he's kind of like you could see it as the Japanese government. Like we're headstrong this way. We're not changing, and any variance could be trouble. And so he had this like looming and overshadowing power, which seemed kind of dangerous. And that's another thing Abe was trying to point out, it is hate towards Japan.
I say that could even symbolize kind of Adam Smith, when he wrote The Wealth of Nations, which is kind of, that's the beginning of theory of capitalism, he talked about an invisible hand that always is kind of, it represents the market determining what's right and wrong. And maybe the fire tower could even go so far as to symbolize that invisible hand that's always there kind of dictating how things will play out.
So now you get to the hole where Nikki is in the entire time. The man, he's like imprisoned in this hole, and the hole seems to be a prison. And that represents the Abe's point of view of Japan. It's imprisoned in this mindset, this closed mindset of, we got to push forward, we got to do this and push to its fullest extent. When Abe's sitting there like, whoa, you got to back up and look at the real picture, like what are you really doing? And as Zane talked about urbanization, that's what he was pleading. The man seems to be pleading Abe's point in the novel, and the villager and the village seem to be the Japanese, like this is the only way we got to do it, and if we don't do it this way, there's no other way. He like offers alternatives, planting trees, going back to like the natural world, but they refuse it. They're saying like this is the most efficient way, but as the reader, we're sitting here like, yes, it may be the most efficient, but as you can clearly see, it is almost literally a prison, and that leads us to the conclusion that like efficiency does not mean better. Is Abe's argument. You lose things along the way, very important things. Page 151, the conversation goes on. It really is important to clear away the sand, but that's a means and not a goal, which is very clever. Sand never fixes itself, and so neither does this headstrong approach to urbanization. Abe is again he's trying to find new ways. He's like, you can still get the same ends with different means. The goal is different than we both want the same goal, but there are better and more natural means to get there. Japanese are slaves to their bad new ways, which are kind of, he wants them to be the old ways, but they're bad now. The methods are like not new. They actually bring them back away from humanity, which is kind of counterintuitive since they're modernizing. He says, you take advantage of the sand, you follow it, you don't run against it. This is Abe through Nikki instructing the village and Japan. In short, you've got to try to make a complete change in your thinking. He's saying that Japan must completely alter their thought processes. Run with what you have, don't force something out of nothing, which is what they're trying to do out of their land. Japan is a slave to this new modern life. Page 151, it said the man had a feeling of being laughed at, and this is with the villager, just like he's not even listening. Abe says that Japan is incessant, it's unwavering, and it won't listen. And that's exactly how the man feels at the bottom of the hole in its prison. In short, you don't have to stick to so unreasonably the old way of life. Abe keeps using this in short, ... It's basically him directly coming out. It's like the most obvious lines in the entire book that this is my message, in short, and it gives a little detail. It says you don't have to stick to so unreasonably the old way of life, which is like you don't have to stick to such an unreasonable path. The old ways are too expensive. Urbanization is more expensive though because it loses everything. He keeps saying that different ways won't work because it's not as efficient, but you're a prisoner to this new modernization, this urbanization. Sand shoveling, like farming, just sand shoveling really doesn't modernize anything. It kind of brings you back to a tribal state of humanity. The village won't take the first step, which is the Japan. I'm restating points. This is like a summation. And Abe pleads with a closed government that is set in their old, bad, new ways. And it propels no growth nor any movement.
So, I mean, I think kind of what we're getting is that from the book, it seems like Abe is continuously trying to say that maybe this isn't the best path for Japan. Maybe in the same time he's critiquing the old ways, maybe not being the most effective, but in the same time, in the same breath, he's also suggesting that maybe this new this new disconnected kind of worldview and this new approach to economics isn't necessarily the best for Japan either, that both are kind of working against the ultimate goal. And that's where I think Connor's point of finding a golden means is really significant. That's, I think, the point that is eventually trying to be driven home in the book.
Yeah, the whole modernized which everyone seems to have trouble with.
They're trying to urbanize and modernize, but the old ways are like, they're still hindering that. So it's like they have the worst of the old ways, and that's causing the new ways to be bad as well. So they have to like figure out like a different way of going about urbanization because they're not doing it for it.
I feel like maybe I saw it a little bit different. Like the people in the village are representing the rural and the culture, you know, living in a community. Whereas Nikki represents urbanization, and there's always got to be a different way. There's always got to be a better way. And so even though the sand thing isn't effective, it's the way that they've always done things. It goes kind of with their culture. They've kind of made it work. And this is such an extreme example of the living in a hole and the getting rid of the sand. But I think, at least I kind of saw Nikki as being, I didn't really like him. He seemed kind of pompous, and I think that's kind of representing some of that urban state of mind. So I think I saw it kind of backwards.
I saw that way too. When the history came in, it just didn't really fit with the context. So it very well could have been, but it just doesn't make sense with the time period.
And it seemed like eventually that he did kind of come to terms with his situation. As much as he may have hated in the beginning, I think eventually there was kind of a compromise made between the two.
I was always confused because, like, I kind of saw it in the way that you saw it, but instead of him being pompous, I saw it as, like, the sand and the culture in the village made him, like, miserable. So instead of, like, him being, like, the bad side of urbanization versus culture, I saw it as, like, culture being the bad side and urbanization being the good side. Like, I understand, like, this whole PowerPoint and stuff, but, like, I just, like, the fact that, like, it was everywhere and, like, he couldn't escape it and it, like, was making him so upset. Like, I guess that could go with what you're saying, like, he's looking for the next best way to, like, do things and stuff, but I just saw it as, like, culture was just hindering everything and, like, you couldn't get away from it, and it's not going away, and you're not going to be able to progress unless you can get rid of it, and I don't know, it's just, but then, like, the end just confused me how he, like, came to terms with it. It was like, well, why would you come to terms with something that makes you so miserable? But that's just how I saw it. I don't know.
Sam, I like how Katie brought up that it could be like, you know how it's it always said throughout the entire book that it's everywhere, like the